For me, you are the definitive Spider-Man artist. When I think of Spider-Man and when I close my eyes, what Peter Parker should look like, what Spider-Man should look like, what Mary Jane should look like, all come from your art.
Oh, thank you very much.
So this is a
Appreciate
great honor for me as well to be able to host this panel. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But we'll start at the beginning of your trip, which is this your first time in Athens?
Yes, yes. Actually, the promoter, Kostas Karaskos, invited me to come, or we were talking about coming right before the pandemic, back in 2019. And once the pandemic hit and things basically shut down for a while, we didn't talk about it again until maybe a year or two ago. And then now I'm finally here 6 years later.
And what do you think of our beautiful little country?
Oh, well, that's the word, beautiful. It's so far from what I've seen and from what I've tasted, everything is very, very nice. The food is delicious. Had one dinner and one breakfast, and the bread at breakfast was amazing. I couldn't believe it, but I'm supposed to lose weight, not gain weight, so it's going to be a little tough.
Do you have more days here after the convention to
Yes,
explore?
we have Monday and Tuesday of sightseeing. They said that they had planned some sort of a tour for us, to some of the high spots, Acropolis, Parthenon, I believe, a few other places names that escape me right now, but we're definitely looking forward to seeing all those things in person rather than in history books and on videos, since I was a little boy.
All right, let's go back to when you were a little boy. How did you get into, well, let's start with comics. Were you a comic fan when you were younger?
In a way, yes. I always loved cartoons on television, and my father used to bring home the newspapers on the Sunday, and they had the comic strips in there where I got to read Prince Valiant and The Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, Flash Gordon, Dick Tracy, Terry and the Pirates, and whatever adventure strips were in the newspapers. And of course, in the late 1950s, they had Superman on television on the TV series with George Reeves in glorious gray and white. So I had no idea what Superman really looked like in color until my father brought me home a comic book. And I saw that Superman was in red, yellow, and blue, much to a child's delight, because, hey, we have those crayons, now I can draw my own Superman and color him in, so.
So how did you get into the art part of that? How did you know you were interested in art in general?
Well, as soon as my father brought me home that comic book, I wanted to sit down and create my own little story. And actually, it was more like a synopsis of the story that I was reading, and I did it in one page, in 6 or 7 panels, and in pencil, and then I colored it in. I mean, rudimentary art, but still legible enough where now I was interested in learning how to draw the characters and basically doing what every young kid does, is copy what he sees until you get decent enough at it where you can create your own stories and draw the characters, well, close to what they are there, but without really understanding anatomy and composition and things like that, which came later on as I got older, and I did study all that on my own. But initially, while I was going through high school, my main ambition was to go into biology and become a doctor, surgeon actually. And I always felt, okay, I'm going to do biology and medicine by day. If I want to relax at night, weekends, maybe I'll draw, paint, whatever. And once I got to college for the first 2.5 years, I realized that I was more interested in the arts than I was in the biology end. And so at the same time, to put myself through college, I was playing in a band, rock music, etc., to help pay for school. And after doing that for a year and a half, because I dropped out of school, took a sabbatical, if you want to say that, for a year and a half, and I just played in the band, saved up my money. But my bandmates were all very serious about music, but I wasn't. And so I said, well, I have to do something else with my life. And I decided I'm going to art school in New York City. And so I applied, I got in, and there I was studying illustration and then comic book illustration with Will Eisner, who was the creator of The Spirit way back in the 1940s. And so with him as a mentor, and also another mentor that I had was John Romita Sr., because when I was going to high school on Long Island in New York, he lived in the town next to my town, and his sons, John Romita Jr. and his older brother, went to high school with me. So I got to meet John Romita Sr. at a very early age, got to his house, saw him when he was first working on the Fantastic Four and still working on Spider-Man. And he sort of became a mentor to me also. But when I tried to get into Marvel Comics at one point, there was nothing open, but I put together my own little comic book magazine called a fanzine back in those days. And I sent it around, and to this one gentleman that I sent it to, his name was Phil Suling. And in America, we had Phil Suling on the East Coast in charge of distributing comics, etc. And on the West Coast, there was another gentleman named Bud Plant. Also, Phil Suling was basically the inventor of the large comic book conventions. I mean, there were always one-day shows here and there with maybe one guest and a bunch of vendors, but Phil was the first one to start up these 3-day shows in New York City, and they became very popular. So I sent him a copy, and he ordered 500 copies of my magazine, and then he was basically selling them at his table. And when I went to this one show, and I saw that he had them out there, I was interested, and I said, how is the book doing? And he said, it's doing pretty well. People seem to be interested. I said, okay. And I went about my business. And as it turned out, within a half hour, I was paged to come back to Phil Suling's table. And this older gentleman was thumbing through my magazine with a big smile on his face. And it turned out to be Saul Harrison, the president of DC Comics at the time. And so as he was looking through it, he asked me if I was working, and I said no. And he said, how would you like to work for DC Comics? I said, of course. What else? No, I don't want to do that. So, yeah, I had an interview he says, you have to meet the art director just as protocol, but I'll let them know that you're coming in, and as far as I know, you're in. And I went in that week, and I left with my first job, which was a one-page mystery story. And after that, turned that in, I got a 7-page science fiction story, and then a 5-page war story, and then another 2-page mystery story. And when I turned in that fourth story, the art director, Vince Coletta, called me into his office and asked me if I'd like to draw Green Lantern. And I said, sure. What happened to the regular guy? Don't worry about him. He's busy. So he brought me into the editor, and Julie Schwartz, and he said, so what makes you think you can draw Green Lantern? I said, I'm a big fan of Gil Kane, and I love the character, and, I've been a fan since I was a little kid, etc. And he says, okay, well, draw me a couple of pages of Green Lantern flying and doing things so I can see your style. So I said, okay. And 2-3 days later, I went back in, showed him the work, and he liked it. And he sent me home with my first Green Lantern story, written by Denny O'Neil, which appeared in Green Lantern, Green Arrow number 100 back in 1977. And that was pretty much all she wrote. I kept doing more fill-ins. And then I got to do the regular assignment of Green Lantern. And eventually they also gave me the Flash to do. And then 2 books got to be too much. And I was lured away from comics by the advertising field because I got a movie poster to work on and storyboards for TV commercials and things like that, which paid really well. But with comics, you always had something on your drawing board. With advertising, you got a great job for a week or two, and then you could sit around doing nothing. And that kind of waiting just was eating at my nerves. So I said, I got to go back to comics and see, I'll still sporadically do advertising. And so when I got back to comics, I went back to Julius Schwartz, and he put me on Superman family stories like Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane. And then eventually I was doing Superman and DC Presents and some backups in Action Comics. And I did that for about 4 years. And then back in 1984, at the end of the year, everybody that was working on Superman was taken out for a lunch. And we figured, oh, they really like us. They want to feed us, okay? And as it turned out, they were letting us know that they were going to change all the creators on Superman because the books were not selling that well. And they were bringing in new blood. So they were bringing in Marv Wolfman, John Byrne, Jerry Ordway, Terry Austin to work on Superman creatively. But we would have other work to do. For me, as it turned out, I turned in my last Superman story, and Julius Schwartz said, I don't have anything else for you to do. Go check with the freelance office. They didn't have anything for me to do, and they were apologetic. But I said, okay, well, I'll just sit by the phone and see what happens. And I immediately called up John Romita at Marvel, about, I don't know, I'm going to say a quarter of a mile away on foot. And I asked him if he had any work for me because DC just stopped giving me work. And he said, yeah, come on over. We always need fill-ins. You can make a living as a fill-in because our guys are always late. So I took a walk across town, and I had my latest copies of the work I had just submitted, left him in his office. And that was a Monday. And by Wednesday, I got a phone call from the Iron Man office, and they needed to fill in an Iron Man story, and would I be interested? So I said, of course. So I went in and left with Iron Man number 211. And I did some research on the character again. I mean, I knew Iron Man, but now he's got new armor, and he's somehow dealing with new other supporting characters, so I had to be familiar with all that to do the story. And after that, well, I was working with that particular editor, and he gave me covers to do, and he gave me Defenders of the Earth, which was Phantom, Flash Gordon, and Mandrake, and I was doing that for a while. And then I got to fill in on Amazing Spider-Man. And from Amazing Spider-Man, 3 issues, I went to about 6 or 7 issues of Web of Spider-Man, and then I got the regular job on that. As a matter of fact, while I was working on a 4-issue arc that was written by Peter David, well, may he rest in peace, in the 4th story, I'm reading the letter column, and fans are writing in, the stories are great. We really enjoy the artwork by Alex Saviuk. And the answer to the letter was, yes, well, Alex and Keith Williams are a regular team, and we can't wait to see what they're going to do as time goes on. And I said, what? And I called up the editor, and I said, I have to find out that I'm the regular guy by reading the letter column? And he said, well, with all the fill-ins that you did, I figured you assumed. I said, I can't assume anything. But yeah, then I ended up working on Web of Spider-Man for over 7 years. And then eventually Spider-Man Adventures based on the animated series. And then when that book got canceled, I left Marvel and started working on the X-Files for about a year. And once the X-Files dried up, I couldn't get back into the comic book business, so I was doing advertising work. And I got a phone call from Marvel that Stan Lee needed somebody to draw the Spider-Man Sunday newspaper strip. So I kept my hand in comics by doing that. And eventually I got to do the inking on the dailies because unfortunately the regular inker passed away. He was 84, I believe, but he got sick. And so, I was able to get that job more or less by default. So I was doing the Spider-Man newspaper strip for 22 years until Stan Lee passed away. But between that and advertising, I was keeping my career going. There really wasn't anything else coming up for me in comics. And after the newspaper strip was over, I was in touch with Marvel and DC, and I've done a number of variant covers for them over the years, now since 2019. But as far as regular comics go, I was drawing the Phantom for a European publisher in Sweden called Egmont. And but I would only do, let's say, one book a year for them because they had a stable of artists that they'd been employing from Europe and South America. Although they were doing stories, comics, every 2 weeks, I still only got one, maybe two to do. And that was fine because they were, at the time, 32 pages long, and I got the pencil and ink. But they gave you a very open deadline. You got 4 or 5 months to do it, which was suited me perfectly with all the other work I had. So I still do a Phantom story every now and then, and I'm still doing variant covers. But that's about it these days.
Great. All right. We got through everything, I think. But
Pretty much. Well,
let's-
if there's one other thing that I'd like to mention was that while I was doing storyboarding, I also got to work doing storyboards for about, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 independent films, which was a lot of fun, going into the production office and working with the directors and the special effects guys. And I'd say most of the films that I worked on were shot in Florida, which is my home state now in America. But I did travel to another state in Louisiana, New Orleans, to work on this. The biggest budget I worked on was a movie called The Reaping, which came out in 2007, and it starred Hilary Swank and Idris Elba before he really became famous. And so I got to meet them. It's always fun to meet the actors. They're regular people. They want to be left alone when they're eating. So, when they're at restaurants and stuff, they really, they try to be as friendly as they can. But when people come up to them with a napkin and, can you just sign this to my little boy, Edward, and make it out to, Edward and this and that. And the guy's trying to swallow a bite of food, and it's like, okay. And then eventually they get a little bit irritated, and the people go home and they go, that guy's a real creep because he didn't want to sign my book.
So let's take a step back and discuss your process a bit. What is a day like for you? More when you were full time in comics. How would that look? Is it morning and night? Is it just inspiration? What's the process for?
Well, for me, I was never a 9 to 5 person, unless I went to an advertising agency and I had to report there by, let's say, 9:30, and you worked there for a day and you just, produced storyboards. You just drew them. The one thing about doing those types of work is that there's very little creativity in that sense because you sit with a director and he gives you a list of things that he wants you to draw. So you've got a certain amount of time to get it done, and they're not looking for finished artwork. They just want to get something compositionally to be able to show the rest of the crew when they're filming their spot. As far as comics goes, when it was more creative, when I first started at DC, I would get full scripts. And a full script, they give you the art direction for the panel. The page will say panel 1 through 6, 1 through 7, whatever. Each panel description has an art direction, and then the word balloons, depending upon which characters are involved in that page. With Marvel, they had the so-called Marvel method or the Stan Lee method, where he would discuss with the artist what was happening in a story, and usually give them a paragraph or two with all the high points for them to cover over the 20 or 22 pages. So you had a lot of creativity in you adding to the story. Okay. As far as my process in terms of a daily, sometimes in the morning I'd wake up and have my breakfast, sit down at the drawing table, and I would look at the pages, the stories, whatever, if it was a script or a plot, and I would immediately see pictures in my mind so that I could start drawing. And some mornings you wake up and you look at the page and you see a blank. And takes me a while to get going. And then I'm just looking at other people's artwork to get inspired, etc. And then eventually, maybe hopefully by lunch, or after lunch, I sit down and I start working. And then end up having to work into the late night hours because with a monthly deadline, you just had to do so and so much work every week, much to the chagrin of my mom, because I used to have a studio at her house. Our house was too small to give me an extra room at that time. And she would say, why don't you work 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 like everybody else? I said, because it just doesn't happen for me creatively. I can't just sit down and have the thing just flow off my head. I wish I could, but I can't. There are some artists, obviously, who just, guys like in the old days, Jack Kirby, they could sit down and start drawing in the left-hand corner and work their way all the way down to the right-hand corner because he would see it in his mind and just be able to draw it. And he would do that every single day. But then again, every creative business has an exception or exceptions. And he was one of a few that had that ability. Me, I just struggled along, but I had fun, And so I can't complain that for all the years that I've been doing this, I've been having fun.
Which one do you prefer, the Marvel method or getting a full script?
I prefer the Marvel method because, let's say, for example, I would get a scene, and the scene would be written basically as paragraphs of a story. It'll say page 2 through 4, and there'll be a big write-up. And so now it's up to me as I'm reading it, to see my pictures formulating in my head. And I go, okay, I got 3 pages. And then I would just start making notes in the margin, where I would think that it would need a panel. And I can do this in 14 panels. And it was up to me to decide how big the panels were. And I could always get that nice hero shot of, let's say, Spider-Man swinging through the city with smaller panels around him, continuing to tell the story. As long as you did not sacrifice story for, let's say, the hero shot, that was still the main objective, was to tell a good story.
And you mentioned Iron Man before and having to learn what he looked like. And did you get to design any armor yourself?
I never designed any armor, but when I first started at DC, once I got to draw Green Lantern, I also got to draw some backup stories on the tales of the alien Green Lantern Corps, and I got to design a couple of alien Green Lanterns, which was fun, and a couple of other villains. Usually you get to design the villains because the heroes have their iconic costumes. When I got to Marvel, one of the first villains that I got to design was Tombstone. And Tombstone's going to be, he first showed up. I heard in the 90s he was on in the cartoons. Then he was in the first, Marvel, multiverse animated story where he was Kingpin's sidekick or supposedly Kingpin's bodyguard. But when you looked at the two of them walking together, more like Tombstone needed the bodyguard because the Kingpin was this guy that took up the space of 3 of those seats right there, and he was about 7 feet tall. He was like, I don't know, if you follow basketball, it would be like taking 4 or 5 basketball players that were 7 feet tall and putting them all across, standing next to each other. Then you put a big head in the middle, and that was the Kingpin. And the Tombstone was just, some 6'5" guy next to him. But I got to design Tombstone, and There was also another hero villain that I got to design called, uh, gee, I forget what the character's name is now. That's awful. But he had his own series. Therefore, it was Knight something or other. And yeah, as a matter of fact, this particular character, I think they optioned him out to Spike Lee because he was interested in possibly developing it for a movie. But I heard that 5 years ago, and I still haven't heard anything else since then.
Night Watch.
Night Watch, that's the one. Okay, there were too many out there. Nightshade, Nightman, Night this, Night that.
So, two questions. One is, who was your favorite character to draw, and who is a character you never got to draw that you wish you had?
Well, I'd have to say my favorite character to draw is Hawkman. Yeah, I got to draw Hawkman at DC Comics also, and I was a big Joe Kubert fan who designed the Silver Age Hawkman, and I just loved that character with the helmet and the wings and the whole bit. And, well, I've pretty much gotten to draw everybody as a cameo here and there, but I never got to draw a Fantastic Four story. So, as a matter of fact, when I was up at Marvel, and Tom DeFalco, who's here, was the writer on the Fantastic Four, and I remember saying to him, "Hey, Tom, listen, if you ever need a fill-in on a Fantastic Four, I'd really love to draw an FF book." And he says, "Hey, I'll keep that in mind, but the regular artist named Paul Ryan, who unfortunately had passed away already at the time, he said, Paul is like a machine. You know, he just never misses a deadline, never misses a book. And if he ever somehow gets sick or something and can't do it, I'll give you a call." But that never happened. So
how is it different working on Web of Spider-Man and Spider-Man Adventures to going to the newspaper strip after?
well, the thing is, again, with the Marvel method, you have the creativity of being able to dictate how you want to draw the panels on a page, how you want to present them, how large, how small, vertical panels versus horizontal panels. In a newspaper strip, you have 6 panels to draw, and they're pretty much all horizontal to a point and all about the same size. So when you're looking at a newspaper strip, you're almost looking at a TV screen, you know, a 16 by 9 modern 4K television. And you got room at the top for the dialogue, and then you've got room to draw. You know, put it this way, when you look at a movie, an action film, and everything is, the screen size is limited, but everything's happening. The fact is that the advantage I don't have is the fact that I don't have motion. So I'm still doing 2D stuff that's stationary in that format, as opposed to a film that, you know, has motion. And that was the same thing with storyboards. I was limited to drawing a certain size because that's what the screen size was going to be. And, you know, if you did a full figure, it was in that horizontal format. You couldn't really draw this giant hero shot, but you got the hero shot on screen anyway because they were flying through the air.
Did you know the whole story of the comic strip or like a month in advance? Because it was only 3 panels, right?
The 3 panels were during the week.
Yeah, and then
and the Sundays were 6 panels. They would send me, basically, initially they would send me an outline of what the story was going to be about, and we would have 4 months to develop a storyline. And so I knew what was happening from beginning to end, but then they would send me actual scripts every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks I'd sit down and I'd be drawing Sundays, and then eventually I'd be inking the dailies. And then in the last 6 months or 7 months of the strip, I was penciling and inking the dailies because the regular penciler, artist on the dailies, Stan Lee's brother Larry Lieber, decided he wanted to retire. And he was 87 at the time, so God bless him.
All right, so before I open up to questions from the audience, just tell us one quick Will Eisner story and one quick Stan Lee story.
Okay. A Will Eisner story. Well, When I was a student at Will Eisner's class, I mean, obviously getting in, I was self-taught, and it would be once a week. He would have basically a studio class from 9 to 12, and in the first 2 hours he would lecture. No, for 1 hour he would lecture, and then 2 hours would be studio time, where he'd go around to all the kids, and he would give them pointers. He'd look at their work, etc. And he'd come to me, and he'd look at the work, and he'd say, "You're doing okay," and he'd move on to the next guy. And I'm thinking, I'm doing okay. I mean, I can't take this to Marvel and DC. I'm not doing that okay. But I got to a point where once I got to him and I said, "Will, I could really use some help on some of the pointers, because it seems like you're giving the other guys more time than you give me." He goes, "Well, because they're really in bad shape, so I have to try and help them out." But he says, "Why don't you come to my office?" He had an office outside of the classroom. And he said, "Come to my office and we'll look at what you're doing." And he gave me, I had drawn this 4-page strip, and he gave me 2 hours of his time to go over every single panel and tell me what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. And that was probably the best learning experience I had there. And then after we did those 2 hours, we went out to lunch at this club that he belonged to in New York. They called him Gentlemen's Club. Guys just go there and smoke cigars and read newspapers and talk stock markets and stuff. And I was dressed in, jeans and a shirt. And when I got to the front, the guy looked at me and he says, "What size are you?" I said, 42. "Here, wear this jacket." I had to put a jacket on to go into the club, so I didn't look like a complete bum. I'm in art school. I mean, hey, come on. So that's my Will Eisner story. As far as Stan Lee, well, the best Stan Lee story I have that's memorable to me is when I first got the call from Ralph Macchio, who was an editor at Marvel, and he said, "Stan Lee is looking for somebody to draw the Spider-Man Sunday strip. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure, work with Stan Lee, and even if it's only one page, I still get to keep my hand in comics drawing Spider-Man." So I put together just a package of my books, Web of Spider-Man books, etc., and sent it out to Stan so he could look at my work. And this is back in 1997, when we still had answering machines, with discs and tapes and whatever. And remember coming home from shopping or something one Friday afternoon and saw that I had one voicemail. And so I listened. I played it back, and it was Stan Lee. And he goes, "Hello, Alex. This is Stan Lee. I love your work. I'd love to work on the Spider-Man strip with you. It doesn't pay much, but think of the glory." That's what he said to me. And it ended up paying as much as I was making on a regular page of Interior Comics. But it wasn't the point. It was just that he was saying, just think of the glory. Basically, I mean, I know guys that worked in the industry that said, "Oh, I'm doing something for Stan Lee. I would do that for free." And I'm thinking, well, I'm generous, but I'm not that generous, okay? But yeah, that's my Stan Lee story.
Great. All right, let's open this up to questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Sure.
Was the process in working in Web of Spider-Man versus Spider-Man Adventures any different, or was it kind of the same thing?
Spider-Man Adventures, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, with in Web of Spider-Man, was it
Web
similar?
Web of Spider-Man, I got to draw in my own style. And when they took me off of Web of Spider-Man and offered me Spider-Man Adventures, they said, "Oh, we'd like you to start this new comic, Spider-Man Adventures, and you could do it in your own style." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "And if you want to ink it, you can ink it too." So I got to ink the first 2 issues, but it was just too much work to do one book a month, pencil and ink. I just wasn't that fast. But then, after about 5 issues, they said to me, Well, we're thinking about it, and we'd like to follow the style of the cartoon more than doing a regular comic. So we would like you to just eliminate shadows and black areas and not detail as much. Just give us outlines. So I said, so you mean like a coloring book? And they said, yeah, pretty much. And I'm thinking, do I really want to do that? I mean, it's going to look so bland. And I said, do I get paid the same? Oh, yeah. I said, oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, no problem. And so I started doing it that way, and it was very strange just to do the outlines. As time went on, I was sneaking a little bit of black in there, just, every now and then. They didn't say anything. And by the time I finished my tenure on the book, there was more black in there probably than when I started, but it still wasn't the same. It was very stylized in that sense.
Other,
Thanks for coming here.
Oh, thank you.
What's the difference between working for an American company and a Danish company like Egmont?
Oh, well, let's see. I would say, first of all, again, working for Egmont, you get full script, okay? And what's interesting about that is they don't break it down into pages for me. It would be, let's say, 32 pages, and they would just go panel 1 through panel 157. And I'm going 150. Then I start dividing. 32 goes into 157. Oh, 7 or 8 panels a page. So that's one difference. You don't have room to really move around and draw those nice big hero shots. And some, depending upon which writer you worked with, some of them wrote a lot. So while I was penciling, I'd look at all this dialogue and I'm thinking, I've got 7 panels or 8 panels on this page. Now I have to use, in pencil, start writing out the dialogue across the top to see how much room I have left to draw. Because I could use vertical panels, but now I've got this big balloon, and by the time I finish the balloon, I've had less than half the amount on the bottom. And then the unfortunate part was that I guess they would edit the script after I finished drawing it. Strange, like I said. And then when the story got published, the balloon was only half the size. So I'm thinking, well, if I would have known it was half the size, I would have had more artwork and I wouldn't have had all this negative space. Now, negative space is great if you plan for it. Negative space could be a compositional aspect in the panel, but not when it's kind of forced upon you by the editor deciding to make the balloon really small. So the process was, it was difficult to get used to because, again, so much writing, fewer panels per page, so you have to draw smaller. And as I said, the fact that even at the beginning, I had to be the one who, it's an inconvenience, but you get it done to have to break down 157 panels into 7 or 8. And then when I would talk to them about it initially, they said, well, you could have a page with 6 panels or 5 panels if you want to get a big one in there. I said, well, yeah, but then I got to spread those other ones out and make 9 and 10 panel pages, which may not be appropriate for what it is that I'm trying to draw. So I very rarely had that big shot in there. Let's say a nice big heroic pose of the Phantom or something, just for the sake of not wanting to sacrifice storytelling and doing, the proper amount of work in there. And in Egmont and in the European comics, they really are very background conscious. If you look at Bonelli's comics from Italy, the backgrounds in there are amazing. But again, they've got 9, 10, 12 panel pages. Every panel has backgrounds in it. So it ends up being more work putting in all the backgrounds. But since I only do 1 book a year, more or less, and they give me 5, 6 months to do it, I don't mind putting in the time. By the time it's over, it looks good. So I'm okay with it.
other, oh.
Hello.
Hello.
It's a question in reference to an issue you did for What the parody series. Number 3. In the first story,
Oh.
you have contributed sketches of other artists as well as yourself. So I guess that's a unique opportunity to draw yourself.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how the whole thing came together. Was it the writer Glenn Hardling who had specific artists in mind and got you guys to do the story? Did he just show up with a story and you happened to be the artist and then you talked about the names and the parody? How does a parody come together in general?
I guess just the way that was presented to me, I think it was a 6-page story. And they said, hey, listen, would you like to draw this? And I said, it's based on the 3 issues with Craven. And so I said, yeah, sure, sounds like fun. And it was just the fact that, Mary Jane was like Miss Piggy and, you had Spider Ham and Peter Porker, and I was Alex Saviuk. So I had to kind of make myself look like a yak. And Jim Salicrup, the editor, was Jim Salamander. And Glenn Herdling was Glenn Birdwing. And so I just had fun drawing these goofy-looking cartoon characters for the sake of the parody, okay? And that the parody is sort of based on what happened in the actual story. So there are some points in there that you try to cover and make it look something close to what was published before, but more in a, I would say, a cheerful way than trying to be as violent or as dramatic as it was in the original story.
Any other questions? Okay. I have one last question that is
Sure.
controversial in the Spider-Man community.
Okay.
Are you pro or anti Peter Mary Jane marriage?
Oh, well, considering that I was around back in 1987 when Peter Parker and Mary Jane got married at Shea Stadium in New York at home plate. Stan Lee was there, and they had a couple of actors dressed up as Peter and Mary Jane, and it became such a big deal for the two of them to finally get married in the so-called comic book timeline. While I was drawing the newspaper strip, Peter and Mary Jane were always married despite what was happening in the Marvel Comics. And so I was completely in favor of it. I know that Marvel would be changing things around, killing Aunt May, breaking up Peter and MJ just for the sake of doing something different in the books so that they could sell more books. Okay, but as far as having Peter and Mary Jane be together, I'm all for it. Oh, okay. Hey, I'm gonna be married 49 years. Okay, so I don't know where the time went, but we got married a month after I broke into comics. So that's how long I'm doing both.
Well, thank you so much for your time,
Oh, it was my pleasure.
ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you
Alex
so much
Saviuk.
for coming out. Appreciate it.